Hey, everyone. Welcome to At the Table Season 2. Man, I missed you guys, and I'm glad we're back. And we are talking all about how women reflect the image of God in this season. And I have some incredible guests that I know you're going to be so encouraged by. Today, I have my sweet friend, Katie McCoy, joining us, and she is going to be a sweet treat to be able to kind of share all things womanhood. That's going to kick us off. And then we've got, goodness, we have Kay Warren. We have just so many great women that are like sharing their story. They're sharing how God has used them in unique ways. And as you walk through the book, The Calling of Eve, I hope you already have your copy of it. I hope you're encouraged and challenged, not only by what you're reading in the book, but then how you get to hear real life women today using their gifts and using their talents for the glory of God. So to kick it all off, I could not think of anyone better than literally one of my real life best friends, Katie McCoy. So Katie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jackie. This is so fun. I feel like people are kind of getting a glimpse into just like what our conversations are like.
Oh my goodness. I'm a little nervous, a little scared.
I know, right? Where's it going
to go? But truly, you are just one of the sweetest souls that I get to live life alongside and leading and talking all things, not only from womanhood, but then just what practical ministry looks like and public theology looks like. Mm-hmm. And so I know you sharpen me, you encourage me in so many ways. And what's that pairing the brunette and the blonde that like everybody kind of references like from a while ago? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like, and they always get into trouble, like the brunette and the blonde. I can't think of it right now.
But we need to find that. That's us.
We do, because that's kind of what I feel like we do. We keep each other out of trouble, and then sometimes we find ourselves in a little bit of trouble together. So.
And in all the best ways too, like cheering each other on. So yes, likewise, my friend. It's just a really special friendship that even hundreds of miles separating us. And thank God for technology because we can keep in touch with things like this. So it's great.
Agreed. All right, cool. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves and kind of share with the listeners who you are?
So like you, I graduated from Southwestern Seminary and I did a MDiv and then I did the doctoral work right after. And that was kind of one of those things of you've got the opportunity, you had people telling you, hey, you should really consider this and just kind of went with what was right in front of me, having really not really a sense of what I would be doing with it. And right after graduating, I was able to use that in an academic setting, teaching, and that was a great introduction to kind of using theology in practical ways where women were, especially, and trying to also encourage women to keep getting all the education that they could. And so after about 5 years on faculty, I started this role at Texas Baptist, which is also called Baptist General Convention of Texas. And I serve as director of ministry to women. And essentially, it was this opportunity to take the things that I was doing in the classroom and developing in an academic way and use it directly to serve women in the churches. And the timing of it was just of the Lord, because as all of that was working out personally for me, there were things happening culturally, socially, where I had all of this research and some teaching experience talking especially about that intersection between theology and women and gender issues. Mm-hmm. And as the last 5-10 years have shown us, that has been an issue that's been exploding of not only the gender confusion, what it means to be a woman, but then also you have so many women in the church going, how do we make sense of what we're seeing? And how do we even understand the cultural dialogue and narratives and even new vocabulary that we're all living with and in some ways living according to in just the public square, whether that's at work or you even hear it in a lot of churches as well. And so getting to take all of that I had been doing in kind of a very focused, narrow sense and use that for where what we call like real women, where real women are, and getting to serve them has just been wonderful, just a gift. And I've really enjoyed that. And not only that, but in the broader sense, coming into this role right after COVID has been just an eye-opening look at women's ministry in the local church, because over and over, it can be women in a big metroplex, it can be women in a very rural town, and they're saying the same thing, is that we want more for what we do for women in our churches, but we're not exactly sure what that is or how to create it. And so COVID was really a gift for women's ministry and churches because it accelerated some things that were already happening and brewing. That generational difference of approach to ministry, if I could summarize it, it's moving from event-centered to formation-centered, and women talking much more about discipleship and just the spiritual formation of our lives, and moving away from event-driven or conference-driven women's ministry. And those things are great. They've got a great place. But I think women in general are saying, okay, but there's got to be something that's more holistic, something that's deeper, something that is more formative than what we've been doing. And COVID really demonstrated the need for that. And so I think getting to help women explore what does that look like in your church, and be kind of what I say is, those websites that it's okay, well, what's in your kitchen, what's in your fridge, what's in your pantry, and what can you make out of it? And that's a lot of what I'll get to do is just sit down with women and say, okay, what do you have? What ingredients do you have? And what opportunities are there that you may not even be able to see? So it's been very rewarding.
I think I've seen a lot of that too, even just leading in my own context and then having different conversations with Church Answers Women and just all of these different women leaders, and even just women in the church, I think are asking really good questions. And so I think there is that deep longing of wanting to know, okay, God, what does this mean? Like, I don't want the fluff. I don't want the surface level. Like, I've got real hard life questions that we really need to wrestle out. But then also just kind of this wrestling through of, well, how do I get to those answers? And how do we disciple? How do we tackle formation as women? Because it's similar in some ways to our brothers, but then it's also really unique in other ways. And so I love just how you are tackling so many different things. And we're going to talk about your book and a lot of those gender ideologies and things that you've been researching and all of that. But I think I want to go all the way back and even talking through chapter 1. And I think it's even titled like Womanhood Misunderstood, because I think for me personally, and growing up in my context, the phrase biblical womanhood had so many emotions, and for me, some baggage, some like heavy expectations, right? And I remember as a young woman, and even so now, sometimes like depending on the day and what's coming at me, and maybe lies within my own head and heart, or even just conversations that I'm having with people that are coming from different frameworks, like when we talk, what is womanhood? That is loaded. And it really does depend on your context, your culture, like how you've grown up, what expectations are kind of behind that word. So let's just start the conversation there, which is not an easy answer, I think. But what makes this idea of biblical womanhood so difficult for us to grasp, not only as women, but as the church, our culture, all of it?
That's such a great question. And you're right, it is loaded because I think if we could summarize why it's such a challenge, it's sometimes difficult to understand where does scripture end and culture begin in when we're making those conclusions. And then also kind of those frameworks of here's what it is to be a biblical woman. And so often what I think you and I have found, Jackie, is that a lot of those definitions have been very culturally determined and culturally defined. And we have to take some time to suss out, what is scripture and what is just social expectation. There are some things about if we want to call it biblical womanhood culture, and I feel like that can kind of sub for that mindset or framework that you and I think of, or what comes to mind when we think of it. Sometimes there are things that it can be very biblically based. Some things are, I almost want to say, holdovers from a Victorian era. And that Victorian era, it's so fascinating to see, because if you study now, the word feminism is also loaded, because it's like, well, which type, which era? There's about a dozen different kinds that we could say right away that we see. Early feminism, and especially in England, was 19th century, and they mainly focused on things like equal rights according to the law, the right to vote. And here in America, many, not all, but many of them were strong Christian women in early feminism. They were abolitionists. They were for equal legal rights for not only women, but for African Americans as well. They were trying to overthrow slavery, and then they were turning to themselves to say women deserve to have equal rights before the law as well. There were no small number or severity of inequalities that were very genuine, affecting women: disparity, divorce law, child custody, agency over finance. One of the things, though, that we see is that when we talk about that holdover of Victorianism, Victorianism held that women belonged in an exclusively domestic sphere, and that was a result of the Industrial Revolution. Once the Industrial Revolution came, it changed the economy, and that changed how women related to work and to their families. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, you would have family businesses. Women would learn a trade of their husband, and when their husband died, they would often take over that business and have a way to sustain and take care of themselves in their widowhood. After the Industrial Revolution, you had long work hours. You had exploited child labor, and there were laws that were passed, good laws that helped prevent the exploitation of especially vulnerable children. There were also things that affected the degree to which a woman could participate in that labor force. And as a result, women became more and more centered on the home, taken out of the workplace and centered on the home. And so, and now to be centered on the home, that's a good thing. I would argue both parents should be centered on the home. It's just going to look different and be expressed differently. A mom with a newborn or toddler age child, she's going to have a different type of center on the home focus than she would when her kids were school aged or high school aged. So as this occurred, though, it also came with a value system that that really limited women to being not only in the domestic sphere, but it was considered unseemly for women to be intellectually inclined, to have goals or ambitions of their own. And it became kind of a progressive de-intellectualization of women as well. That type of thing over the course of generations is the type of cultural pattern that we don't really even think about. It's just sort of inherited, but it affects how we see women. Another way that I think we've seen this expressed too is kind of the professionalization of education, where you get education so that you can do a particular job, not so that your mind can be formed, that you can grow intellectually, but so that you can get a particular kind of job. So if that's the case, and women are not supposed to work outside the home, well, then what's the point of women getting higher education? Mm-hmm. And so I think we've seen some of these things be holdovers in our understanding of what it means to be women. Now, I think that's all quite of the older generation, and it's also very cultural. So kind of that boomer generation. Today, however, the pendulum ends up swinging far too much in the other direction, where it's all about my self-fulfillment, my fulfilling of my ambitions, and my self-actualization. And what scripture tells us is that man or woman, the key to a fulfilling life is self-giving. It's self-sacrifice, it's commitment. And especially in the Hebrew mind, the epicenter of your happiness was your family. And now I'm 38, never married. That looks different for me, but at the same time, I'm very mindful of what my family needs. Thankfully, I don't live too far away from them. And so I'm able to also help my family in other ways. But along with being unmarried, I'm able to serve other families. I'm able to take a lot of what I do in ministry to serve other moms who don't have time to maybe do all this research on how gender ideology is affecting their kids. But I get to be their servant to say, here is what you need to know as a mother. I'm not raising your kids, but I can help arm you in a way that you don't have the bandwidth because you're so busy raising your kids and spinning all kinds of plates. So there's still a very family focused next generation mindedness there. When we're talking about biblical womanhood, I have a very simple definition that a lot of people might take issue with because it's not specific, and it's not specific on purpose. I think it is quite simply an adult human female, which that in itself is controversial enough in our culture, but adult human female who is following Christ and obeying his word in all her life in relationships. Now, none of us do that perfectly, but we are oriented around obeying Christ and his word and following after what his word says in all of our life and relationships. And when we do that, if I, as a woman, am doing that, it's going to change how I see singleness. It's going to change how I see marriage. It's going to change how I act in all of my relationships. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a matter of, as we are simply obeying Christ as males or females who are reconciled to him in a right relationship through faith in Christ, all of those things just sort of get worked out. And part of how they get worked out is the biological difference between male and female goes so much deeper than just our reproductive capacity. Mm-hmm. It has much more to do with our neurology and neurological differences. Essentially, when you just allow a male to be a man and a female to be a woman, and then work that out in their relationships according to God's design, I think then we find biblical womanhood. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm telling you is I think we have made it way too complicated.
Amen to that. I agree. I agree. And there's so much that you said there. And I know, especially if you're listening, you're like, okay, hold on, let me rewind a couple minutes. What did she just say about that? Because there's just so many layers, I think, that we bring culturally. And then anytime that you tack on the word biblical, like that idea of this is the right way to do it is going to cause some kind of friction, I think, because we are trying as women to live out our calling. We are trying to image him in ways, and that is going to look diverse. And so I think in a lot of ways, culturally, we end up putting it into a box and saying, in order to follow God, you have to look this certain way. I remember even saying in the book and kind of describing myself as the social June bug. Like I wasn't a social butterfly. I wasn't pretty. I was loud and awkward and abrasive sometimes. And so I think there were so many things that even just culturally, or even within my own story, that I had picked up or had maybe been taught to me to where I didn't feel like I fit the mold. And so therefore the conclusion was, well, surely I'm not following God the way that I needed to, or he was displeased with me. And so I love the idea that we are all created in God's image. We all are being pursued by him and have surrendered our life to him. And that's going to look really different in how we follow him. And he's forming us. Like, I think there's so much that we try to like kind of put this mold together. And instead, we really do need to view it as this journey of whatever season we're in, whatever people are in front of us, whatever gifts we have, that he is going to work that out for his glory and our good. So I love just all that you unpacked there. So I kind of want to almost fast forward to like right now in this cultural moment. I mean, I'm confused too. And I love how you say, like, you're able to bring this research and some of your own gifts to come alongside women that are in this cultural moment, to where now we're at a point to where people are trying to erase gender. Like they're trying to say being a woman doesn't matter, like they're trying to almost lessen it. So why don't you share a little bit about just what you've learned and even some of the things that I think you're kind of trying to communicate and teach women and men about the beauty of being female. I mean, like he did make us in his image, male and female. And so there's got to be this distinction and beauty and goodness rooted in that design. And so the lie that we would want to erase that completely is obviously not something that we want to live out. So tell us a little bit about just kind of what you're seeing and what you're trying to kind of come alongside women to say, no, being female is good. Being a woman is good in the way that he has designed things.
Yeah. So I think it goes all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2. And what we see in Genesis 1 is the only thing we know about them is there's two different types of humans. There's a male type and a female type. Mm-hmm. But what we also know is that they both have this equal command from God to rule over the earth. And they also have this equal or same status as being those created in his image. What that tells us just from Genesis 1 is, first of all, that to be male or female, to be embodied in maleness or femaleness, is part of how we image God. We can't separate our biological sex from being in God's image. And in fact, if we truly believe that God makes everything and makes it good, the material and the immaterial, that the physical world is good, then down to that 23rd chromosome, which determines whether you are male or female, that is by God's design as well. What we see in Genesis 2 is that they fulfill that shared command to reign and rule over creation in different ways according to their relationship. So it's almost like we might say that Genesis 1 is about biological sex and Genesis 2 is about gender identity, because what it shows is that how they relate to each other is different and they're not identical. And so a female relates to the male differently than the male relates to the female. That might seem like, no kidding, that's so obvious. But today, it's all being very blurred to say that who you are biologically has no bearing on who you are as a person, certainly not just your gender, but who you are as an individual. And so what we find with Genesis 1 and 2 is that together they form a cohesive whole, that if you are a male, you are a man, and if you are a female, you are a woman. And how we express that gender difference is driven by our biology. It's not just determined by our biology, it's driven by it. And God created us fearfully with great reverence and wonderfully in ways that science, for all of our technological advances, is still catching up to the created differences between male and female. They are vast and they are comprehensive. And so some of the challenge is like the previous question, we're trying to reduce being a woman to certain behaviors, and we can't, because God created us all to be individuals. Now, there are generalities. There are things that across cultures, across areas, we'll find in common. But I think the best definition of female comes from a Catholic scholar named Abigail Favale. She wrote a book called The Genesis of Gender. And she says very simply that a female is a human being whose biology is ordered or organized around the potential for pregnancy, the potential to gestate new life. And as odd as that might seem to us, especially as we've been living in that kind of maybe more behavior or attribute centered definition of biblical womanhood, I think it's an excellent definition because it ties it back to our created embodied selves, to say that this isn't about a particular set of attributes or behaviors or characteristics, but rather it's the potential that we all have in contributing to the world new life. And whether that is biological, whether that is spiritual, everything that God created us to be is, as women, we are those who help bring about new life, that we are nurturing that new life. We are helping form that new life. And very much imprinted into our bodies is that truth. What it also means is that it's impossible for us to understand what it means to be a woman apart from relationships. And others have said it, I'll paraphrase what they have said, is that you don't understand what it means to be a woman without the existence of a man. And a man doesn't understand what it means to be a man without the existence of a woman. So this idea that we can completely define ourselves according to ourselves is a myth. It always creates understanding the self in light of comparison and contrast with another. And that's exactly how God set it up. And we even see that in Genesis 2, don't we? Where the man is going, wait a second, two there, they're different, but they correspond to each other. Where's mine? Where's the one who is different from me, but corresponds to me? And that harmony of both what is in common and then what is different is where we find the real meaning of what it means to be not only female, but what it means to be a woman.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and specifically in your book that is released, To Be a Woman, like you kind of start to answer the question of when people start to kind of erase this gender identity and they start trying to, a woman is then trying to become a man or vice versa, those kind of things, all of the hormone therapies, all of that. Tell us a little bit about what you're finding in your research, because I think that is a really big, exposing really of this truth that we need both genders and that is God's good design. And so anytime that you try to kind of erase that or rework that, there's severe consequences. So tell us a little bit about just some of the research that you're finding from this.
Yes. So when you disconnect the body from gender, and then you just ask the question, what is a woman or what is a man? And it has nothing to do with biology. You're left with stereotypes and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Because truly, if you try to say, ask someone, well, what is a woman? Well, if it's not anything related to the female body, how do you determine that?
Mm-hmm.
It's someone who likes to dress a certain way, someone who likes to wear makeup, someone who has certain behavioral characteristics. Well, can you really reduce being a woman to wearing a dress? Mm-hmm. Or wearing mascara, or being maybe a more compliant personality? We know women all over the place, even just in our own lives, who don't fit those stereotypes. But when you disconnect it from the body, that's all that you're left with. And so we have a generation that has really latched on to this idea that your gender is nothing more than just a socially influenced idea, that it has nothing to do with your body. And there's also a generation of young people, typically about 25 and under, who have been influenced by this idea that if you have this sense of inner angst, that you just don't really feel at ease with yourself, or even if there is something else that has been going on in your life, that perhaps the issue is not the problems that we might be able to identify, but you're just transgender. Mm-hmm. And we have especially many high school, middle school students, particularly girls, who have not expressed any sense of gender dysphoria, of feeling out of harmony with their body and their inner sense of being a girl or a young woman. And a lot of times they have anxiety, they have depression, they have confusion or feeling awkwardness about the biological changes in their body. Who didn't? Who survived puberty, and it was a fun experience. I'd love to meet that woman. Other times it's something even deeper. There's another issue going on in their families. There's another issue that she's trying to cope with, and seeing all this positive attention that people get from a non-binary identity, and sort of fixating on that or latching onto it. And unbelievably, what we've had in the medical community is kind of this chorus of professionals saying children know who they are by the time they're 4 years old. And the best thing a parent can do is just go along with what children say that they are. The reason this is so pervasive is because, in part, social media. There are things that children are being introduced to at very young ages in their school system. And the data just demonstrates how unusual this is, because up until just a few decades ago, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is like the Bible of psychological conditions, it recognized gender dysphoria or transgender identity as a mental illness, as something that people needed psychological care for. And it typically, almost overwhelmingly, was biological males. And they would express it when between about 2 and 4 years old. So very young. Mm-hmm. And when I say rare, I mean like less than 1%, like 0.014 of percentage of males. This was extraordinarily rare. Now, however, in the last 15 years, it's all flipped. It's exploded, and it's girls. It's overwhelmingly young girls who expressed no prior sense of gender dysphoria. And oftentimes it's girls who their peer groups, their friends, perhaps other influencers in their lives, whether that's a celebrity or a teacher who comes out as saying that they're non-binary, and they're doing what frankly girls do. We identify with each other. We take on the patterns of our friends. If that all sounds familiar, you were just a middle schooler. That's what we all did in middle school. That's how we connected to each other, to the point that even if you didn't even really believe it, you were identifying with your BFF and supporting her. And that meant maybe even agreeing with something that you didn't agree with because you were trying to keep that friendship. You wanted to keep that social bond. And so part of what's happening in our culture today, it's not just exploiting children, it is horribly exploiting the girlness of girls and convincing them that they have some type of disorder or pathology, or they were born in the wrong body because they're normal girls. Puberty is something that's good and normal. It's not something to medicate away. And so we have a whole generation of girls that have been really influenced by these ideas. And we are just now beginning to see the effects of that kind of harm.
Yeah, goodness, so much good there. And I'm a mom of 3 boys, but I mean, I work alongside college women, girls and our youth girls, and even thinking and praying for like future spouses and those kind of things. And I see it. I see it in sports and what's happening with just college sports and athletics. And it does feel like there is just such a loss at what is happening at the beauty of being female, and wanting to champion that in these young women, like wanting to come alongside them and say, goodness, the things that you're wrestling with are hard, and the mental illness and the things that they are struggling with, especially after COVID, are so completely difficult. But I also think we've got opportunity to be empathetic and compassionate about what they are struggling with and maybe what they are doubting, but then also able to champion, look at how God made you and let's flourish, like let's actually live into and lean into all that he has made you to be. So I think as we wrap up, I knew this was going to go so fast and we were going to run
right. I know.
So I think I want to land like real practical, because even as I'm listening to you talk and our conversations that we've had, like I want our moms, I want our neighbors, I want our coworkers, our teachers. I mean, I want women to really grab hold of the goodness of how God has created them and how much they are those life givers. We talk about that in The Calling of Eve and writing about that, and that we have so much opportunity to bring life to death, that we get to bring light into darkness as we image him. So what would your kind of final encouragement be to women, like all of us that are listening, and maybe even our brothers that are kind of listening in and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I encourage my wife? How do I encourage my daughter or my coworker? Like, how do we really kind of come alongside with good words, compassion, but also a brighter idea of just what it means to really live out who God has created us to be?
We are whole persons. And we can't reduce any one human being to any set of stereotypes or characteristics. We are whole persons. And what you and I and every other person needs is first to be reconciled to God in Christ, and nothing else about makes sense, including what it means to be female, including what it means to be a woman. And so everything about us as God's image bearers was intended to connect with and reflect our Creator. And so until we center these conversations on being God's image bearers, nothing else is going to fall into place as we talk about relationships, who we are in society, who we are in our families. And so I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that no human being can be reduced to just one thing. We are multifaceted. We are body, soul, mind, spirit, and we are interconnected wholes. And so I think one of the ways that the Christian worldview can combat so much of what we're seeing in our culture today is that we have a worldview that offers an integrated whole view of the person, that you're not just your gender. You're not just your sexual attraction. You're not just your job. You're not just your relationships. You are a whole person. And I think when we recapture that, it's going to help 1,000 different questions as we figure out what does it mean to be living as a woman created in God's image in my culture and my time today.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great answer. And I love just how creative God is and how much even just being able to look at you and have this conversation and even just the women around me, the brothers around me, like God has given so much of that creativity and beauty and wisdom and depth, and it's all around us. And so I really think it does change the way you view people. I think it changes how you relate and interact because everything is pointing to a better kingdom. Everything is pointing to a really good God that really does know what he's doing and how he created us. And so when things feel off or when things feel tilted, it really is like a question of the heart of like, what lie or what wound or what misconception, do we have that we're trying to fit in? So I think so many just great reminders from you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, To Be a Woman, The Confusion Over Female Identity and How Christians Can Respond. Tell us about the book. How do we connect with you? How do people learn from you? All of the things.
Yeah, so the book comes out June 6th, and you can find more information about it at tobeawomanbook.com, tobeawomanbook.com. And so you can pre-order now. And if you pre-order before June 6th, you are able to get a interview with between me and a doctor, medical doctor who has been doing a lot, not only research on this, but testifying in federal courts about just legislation that is coming up. But you can find it wherever books are sold. And then you can get in touch with me. My handle is Blonde Orthodoxy. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Blonde Orthodoxy, blonde with an E. And I look forward to connecting with you. And I hope that you'll read the book because there is a lot more research packed into it and a lot of practical issues that parents and pastors are dealing with today.
Yes. I mean, I am so glad that you're just in my back pocket and a text and Marco away. And so I cannot encourage you enough to get this book, to read it together, like get other moms, get other women, read it with your daughter. I mean, like this is a message, this is truth that we all need right now. And I think a kindling and a fire that will really kind of reignite, you know what, I get to image him in really big creative ways. And so I can't wait to see just how God works, not only through the book, but Katie, as you continue to come alongside all of us and teach us and walk with us as women of God.
Thanks so much for having me, Jackie.
Yes. And as always, thank you for joining me for this new season of At the Table. Next episode, we are actually going to be unpacking that Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and what it means to be made in the image of God, to bear his image. And so I'm going to have Carmen Imes on the show. And so you will not want to miss it. It's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait to learn from her. But as always, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next episode.